The massive crystalline spires of Zephyr Prime gleamed under twin suns as billions of alien beings gathered in the capital's vast ceremonial plaza. Hovering screens displayed the historic moment across 12 star systems, each world forced to witness the crowning of their new absolute ruler. Supreme Chancellor Vorth stepped forward on the golden platform, his forearms spread wide as thunderous cheers echoed from the assembled crowds below. Worth's scaled hide, rippled with bioluminescent patterns that signaled triumph to his Zephyrian followers. His massive head turned slowly, yellow eyes scanning the representatives from dozens of conquered species. The Altarians stood silent, with their crystalline bodies dimmed in submission. The furry Kellans kept their ears flat against their skulls. Even the proud Nexari had bent their serpentine necks in defeat. Today marks the end of the weak Galactic Council. Worth's voice boomed through translation devices, reaching every corner of known space. No more shall inferior species pretend. To guide the destiny of the galaxy, the Zephyrian Empire now rules all. The crowd roared its approval, but Vorth raised a clawed hand for silence. His next words carried a chilling edge that made even his own generals shift uncomfortably. Let it be known that the extinct vermin called humans left behind colonies and structures that now belong to us. Their pathetic civilization died out centuries ago, yet some still whisper their names in dark corners. This ends today. Any mention of human culture, their primitive language, or their failed history is now forbidden across all worlds. On distant planets, alien children watched as enforcement squads marched through cities, tearing down memorial plaques and burning books that contained human references. Libraries that had preserved Earth's literature for generations became funeral pyres. Even the mathematical constants that human scientists had discovered were given new names, erasing humanity's contribution to galactic knowledge. Worth's coronation ceremony continued for hours, each ritual designed to demonstrate his absolute control. He signed decrees that stripped rights from non-Cepharian species, dissolved trade agreements that had kept peace for centuries, and established forced labor quotas for the Outer Rim worlds. The galaxy watched helplessly as 300 years of careful diplomacy crumbled in a single day. Meanwhile, far beyond the celebration, and far from the prying censors of the Empire, something stirred in the cold depths of Sol's outer system. The Kuiper Belt stretched endlessly through space, filled with ice and rock that had orbited the sun since the solar system's birth, hidden among these frozen chunks. Camouflaged monitoring stations had recorded every word of Vorth's speech. Admiral Minho sat in the command center of Station Eco 7, his weathered face illuminated by the soft blue glow of holographic displays. Around him, dozens of technicians worked quietly at their posts, analyzing data streams that flowed in from across the galaxy. The station itself was a marvel of hidden engineering, built inside a hollowed asteroid and shielded from detection by technology that the galaxy had never seen. "Sir, we have confirmation from all monitoring posts," reported Lieutenant Yunji, her fingers dancing across a control interface. Every major world received the broadcast. The Empire's messaging is consistent across all systems. Minho nodded. Slowly, his dark eyes reflecting years of patient waiting. He pulled up tactical displays showing Zephyrian fleet positions, supply routes, and communication networks. The Sol Defense Compact had spent 2 centuries gathering this intelligence, preparing for the day when their intervention would be necessary. "They really believe we're extinct," Minho said quietly, almost to himself. 200 years of careful hiding, and they still think Earth's children simply vanished. Around the command center, other officers reviewed the implications of Vorth's declaration. The Empire had grown bold in humanity's apparent absence, absorbing smaller civilizations and gradually building toward this moment of total conquest. But their intelligence networks had failed to detect the greatest threat of all. Admiral called out Commander Doyon from the communications station. "We're receiving priority signals from the outer stations. All deep space observers report the same thing. The Empire believes they've won." Minho stood up from his chair, his uniform bearing no insignia that any alien would recognize. The Sol Defense Compact had evolved beyond the need for traditional military structure, becoming something far more dangerous than any conventional navy. Their ships could travel undetected through space. Their weapons could reduce entire fleets to atomic particles. Their soldiers were enhanced far beyond normal human capability. "Prepare encrypted channels to all sector commanders," Minho ordered, his voice carrying the weight of 2 centuries of preparation. "It's time to remind the galaxy that humanity doesn't just disappear. We adapt, we watch, we wait." He looked at the tactical display showing Zephyrian positions throughout known space. Red dots marked their fleet concentrations, supply depots, and command centers. Soon, those red dots would begin disappearing one by one. "They crowned a tyrant today," Minho said, as his staff prepared for the orders that would change everything. "Earth sends its executioners." The hidden stations throughout the Kuiper Belt began transmitting coded signals to vessels that had waited patiently in the dark spaces between stars. Across the galaxy, the Empire celebrated its victory, unaware that they had just awakened something far more dangerous than any civilization they had ever conquered. The first convoy vanished on a Tuesday. Supply Captain Threx was piloting his cargo hauler through the Kepler drift when his escort of 3 Zephyrian destroyers simply stopped responding. 2 communications. One moment they were there on his sensors, blue dots marking their positions in the standard triangular formation. The next moment, empty space stretched around his ship like a vast, dark ocean. Threx sent emergency signals back to Fleet Command while his crew searched desperately with every scanner they had. The destroyers hadn't jumped to hyperspace. There were no energy signatures. They hadn't exploded. There was no debris. They had simply ceased to exist, as if some cosmic hand had erased them from reality. Within hours, patrol ships arrived at Threx's coordinates. Commander Vex led the search personally, bringing 2 full squadrons to investigate. What they found made no sense to anyone trained in conventional warfare. Scattered across several thousand kilometers of space, they discovered fragments of metal and crystal that their computers identified as pieces of the missing destroyers. But the fragments were wrong somehow, twisted at angles that hurt to look at, crystallized in patterns that defied physics. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Gorth, "from the scanning station, the molecular structure of these fragments shows signs of quantum dissolution. It's like something unmade them at the atomic level." Vex studied the readings with growing unease. The Zephyrian Empire had the most advanced military technology in known space. Their warships could withstand direct hits from stellar plasma cannons. Their shields could deflect asteroid impacts. Yet something had reduced 3 heavily armed destroyers to scattered dust without leaving any trace of the weapon used. "Expand the search grid," Vex ordered. "Check for any unusual energy readings, gravitational anomalies, or subspace distortions. Whatever did this might still be in the area." But the patrol found nothing except more questions. The space around the attack site was cleaner than a surgical suite. No residual energy, no exotic particles, no indication that a battle had ever taken place. It was as if the destroyers had been carefully deleted from existence by something that understood matter and energy better than the Empire's greatest scientists. 3 days later, another convoy disappeared. This time, it was a heavily defended supply run, carrying rare minerals from the outer mining colonies. 8 escort vessels and a command cruiser vanished along with the cargo ships, leaving behind only the same twisted fragments and impossible molecular signatures. Captain Juwan watched the search efforts from a distance that measured not in kilometers, but in dimensions that Empire sensors couldn't detect. His stealth frigate occupied a fold in space-time itself, existing in the same location as the Zephyrian patrol ships, but shifted just enough out of phase to remain completely invisible. To the aliens below, his ship was less real than a ghost. Through his enhanced viewing systems, Gion observed the growing panic among the Zephyrian crews. Their commanders shouted orders while technicians ran increasingly desperate scans. They were looking for an enemy they could understand: ships with engines and weapons, aliens with technology they could recognize and counter. They had no concept of what humanity had become during their long exile in the dark. "Recording complete," announced his ship's artificial intelligence in a voice that sounded almost human. All fragments cataloged and analyzed. The dissolution pattern was optimal. No viable technology samples remained for reverse engineering. Guan nodded as he reviewed the tactical data. The Empire's ships were impressive by galactic standards, but they relied on principles that humanity had moved beyond centuries ago. Their weapons fired energy beams and explosive projectiles. Their shields deflected known forms of attack. Their sensors detected conventional matter and familiar energy signatures. None of that helped them against enemies who had learned to rewrite the fundamental rules of physics. Sir, his AI continued, long-range sensors detect another supply convoy entering this sector. Escort strength appears to be doubled from previous runs. They're learning, Juan said quietly. Good. Fear makes them predictable. He activated his ship's quantum drive and felt reality shift around him. Space folded like origami as his frigate stepped sideways through dimensions that most species couldn't even theorize about. In seconds, he had repositioned himself along the convoy's projected route, still invisible, still impossible to detect. The Zephyrian convoy appeared exactly on schedule, 12 cargo vessels, surrounded by 24 military escorts arranged. In a defensive sphere, our commanders had clearly studied the previous attacks and adapted their tactics. Scanner beams swept constantly through space. Patrol fighters flew complex patterns designed to detect cloaked enemies. The formation moved with the careful precision of people who knew they were being hunted. G1 touched them with something approaching respect. These aliens were not cowards, and they were not fools. They simply had no defense against predators who existed outside their understanding of possible threats. Begin dissolution sequence, he ordered. His ship's weapons didn't fire in any conventional sense. Instead, they reached out through quantum fields and convinced the target vessels that their molecular bonds were no longer necessary. Matter forgot how to hold itself together. Energy decided to disperse into forms that served no useful purpose. One by one, the escort ships began coming apart like sand sculptures touched by wind. Their crews had perhaps 3 seconds to realize what was happening before their own bodies joined the dissolution. Returning to the cosmic elements from which they had originally formed, the cargo vessels lasted slightly longer, protected by their escorts' desperate attempts to locate and engage an enemy they couldn't see. But protection was meaningless against attacks that bypassed shields, armor, and every other defensive system ever invented. Within minutes, another convoy had become another debris field, another mystery for Empire investigators to puzzle over. While their fear grew stronger, the first system to go dark was Altair 7, a mining world on the Empire's outer edge. Supreme Chancellor Vorth received the report while reviewing battle plans in his war room, surrounded by holographic displays, showing convoy losses across 12 sectors. The communication officer's voice trembled as she delivered the news. Sir, we've lost all contact with Altair 7. Their defense platforms stopped responding 6 hours ago. Long-range sensors show the orbital stations are still there, but they're not transmitting any signals. Vorth's forearms tensed as he processed this information. Losing supply convoys was troubling enough, but an entire planetary defense network going silent was something else entirely. Send a reconnaissance fleet immediately. I want to know what happened to that system. But before the reconnaissance ships could reach Altair 7, 3 more systems reported similar problems. Defense networks that had protected worlds for centuries suddenly stopped functioning. Orbital weapons platforms powered down without explanation. Communication arrays that connected planets to the galactic network went silent one after another. The pattern became clear within days. Whatever force was attacking the Empire had moved beyond simple convoy raids. They were systematically dismantling the infrastructure that held Vorth's domain together, cutting the connections between worlds and leaving each planet isolated and vulnerable. On Nexus Prime, the Empire's primary military command center, technicians worked frantically to understand what was happening to their computer systems. Chief Engineer Crick stared at his diagnostic screens in growing horror as he watched. Viruses spread through their networks like digital wildfire. These programs are rewriting themselves faster than our security systems can adapt, Crix reported to his superior officers. Every time we develop a countermeasure, the virus evolves around it. It's like fighting an enemy that learns and changes. In real time, the alien engineers had never encountered anything like it. Traditional computer viruses were static programs that followed predictable patterns. These new infections seemed almost alive, growing more sophisticated with each defensive measure they encountered. They didn't just break through security systems. They understood them, adapted to them, and then improved upon them. Within hours, viruses had spread from military networks to civilian infrastructure. Power grids fluctuated wildly before stabilizing under new control protocols that nobody recognized. Transportation systems rerouted themselves according to algorithms that Empire programmers couldn't decipher. Even basic communication devices began displaying messages in languages that predated the Empire by centuries. The messages were simple and repeated across every compromised system. Remember the humans. Remember their justice. While Empire worlds struggled with failing technology and darkened communication networks, Commander Suman led her battalion through the dense forests of Kepler 9. Moving toward the forced labor camp that intelligence had identified 3 days earlier, her soldiers advanced through the alien wilderness like shadows. Their powered armor adapting to the environment with technology that made them nearly invisible to conventional sensors. The labor camp sprawled across a cleared valley, surrounded by energy barriers and guard towers. Thousands of prisoners from dozens of species worked in the harsh conditions, mining rare crystals that powered the Empire's war machine. Zephyrian guards patrolled the perimeter with weapons designed to kill rather than capture escapees. Suman studied the camp through enhanced optics that showed her every detail of the defenses. Guard rotations, weapon placements, prisoner work schedules, her armor's computer systems, analyzed everything and projected optimal assault vectors directly into her visual field. Teams Alpha and Beta, take the outer perimeter, she whispered, into her communication system. Charlie and Delta, disable the energy barriers. Echo Team, secure the guard towers. Remember, prisoners are the priority to minimize collateral damage. Her soldiers moved with coordination that seemed impossible for individual fighters. Their armor systems were networked together, allowing them to share tactical information instantly and react as a single unified force. When Alpha Team engaged the first guard post, Delta Team was already in position to support them before the aliens could call for reinforcements. The assault lasted exactly 17 minutes. Zephyrian guards, who had terrorized prisoners for years, found themselves facing enemies that moved like liquid mercury and struck with the force of orbital bombardments. Energy weapons that could melt through starship armor barely scratched the humans' protective suits. Defensive barriers that had never been breached crumbled under attacks that bypassed conventional physics. When the shooting stopped, Suman walked through the camp's main courtyard where thousands of alien prisoners had gathered. They stared at her with expressions that mixed wonder, fear, and disbelief. Most had never seen a human before the Empire, had spent generations convincing the galaxy that humanity was extinct. An elderly Kellian approached her cautiously, his fur gray with age and malnutrition. His translator device struggled with his whispered words. Are you really human? The stories say your people disappeared long ago." Suman removed her helmet, revealing features that confirmed what the old alien suspected. Her dark hair was tied back in a practical style, and her eyes held the kind of determination that came from fighting for something larger than personal. "Survival, we never disappeared," she said gently. "We were waiting for the right moment to return." Around the camp, her soldiers worked efficiently to free the prisoners from their restraints and tend to their injuries. Each trooper carried medical supplies and food rations prepared not just for combat, but for rescue operations. They moved among the freed aliens with surprising gentleness, their powered armor somehow making them seem protective rather than threatening. The freed prisoners watched in amazement as the humans destroyed the camp's infrastructure with surgical precision. Guard towers collapsed into neat piles of rubble. Energy barriers sparked once and then died forever. Communication equipment melted into metallic puddles that would never carry another message. "Where will you take us?" asked a young Nexari, whose scales had been dulled by months of hard labor. Suman smiled as she watched transports descend from orbit ships that had remained hidden until this moment. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere the Empire can't find you." The rescued prisoners boarded the transport vessels. Word of the liberation spread through underground networks across the galaxy. On dozens of worlds, other species began to whisper that maybe the humans hadn't disappeared after all. Maybe they had simply been waiting in the dark, growing stronger, preparing for the day when justice would return to the stars. The attack began at dawn on Zephyr Prime, though dawn had little meaning when the sky suddenly filled with ships that shouldn't have existed. Supreme Chancellor Vorth stood on the highest balcony of his crystal palace, watching the twin suns rise over his capital city. Below him, billions of Zephyrians went about their morning routines, confident in their empire's strength. The orbital defense platforms that protected their world were the most powerful in known space. No enemy fleet had ever threatened Zephyr Prime. That confidence shattered when reality began to fold. Space above the planet twisted like heated metal, bending in ways that hurt to observe. Through these impossible openings stepped ships that defied everything the Empire understood about physics and engineering. They weren't built, they were grown, their hulls flowing like liquid mercury while maintaining the strength of collapsed matter. Energy danced around them in patterns that suggested they drew power from the fabric of space itself. Vorth's communication officer burst onto the balcony, his scales pale with terror. "Sir, the orbital platforms are trying to engage, but their targeting systems can't lock on to the enemy vessels. The ships keep shifting between dimensions." Through his enhanced viewing equipment, Vorth watched his mighty defense stations fire their most powerful weapons at targets that seemed to be there and not there at the same time. Plasma beams that could crack moons passed harmlessly through the human vessels. Missile barrages designed to destroy asteroid belts found no solid matter to impact against. Then the human ships began to return fire. Their weapons didn't produce visible beams or explosive projectiles. Instead, they reached out through quantum fields and convinced the orbital platforms that their atomic structures were no longer stable. One by one, the massive defense stations simply came apart, their matter reorganizing itself into harmless gases that dispersed into space. "How many ships?" Vorth demanded, though part of him dreaded the answer. "We can't get an accurate count, sir. They keep appearing and disappearing. Our best estimate is several hundred vessels, but they might be the same ships moving through folded space to appear in multiple locations." Vorth felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: genuine fear. The Empire's intelligence networks had reported that the mysterious attackers possessed advanced technology. But this was beyond advanced. This was like watching gods of war demonstrate their power to insects. The human fleet moved into assault. Formation around Zephyr Prime with the fluid grace of a school of fish. Each ship seemed to know exactly where every other vessel would be, their movements coordinated by some form of communication that the Empire's sensors couldn't detect. They surrounded the planet completely, cutting off all escape routes while somehow avoiding collision despite occupying overlapping positions in space. General Taeon materialized on the planet's surface without any visible means of transport. One moment the palace courtyard was empty, except for Zephyrian guards. The next moment he stood there in armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Surrounded by soldiers who had appeared just as silently, the elite guard Vorth's personal protectors and the finest warriors in the Empire opened fire immediately. Their weapons unleashed enough energy to level city blocks, but the humans simply absorbed the attacks. Their armor didn't deflect the incoming fire. It converted the energy into power for their own systems, making them stronger with every shot. Taeon moved through the palace like a force of nature. His soldiers followed in perfect formation, each one enhanced far beyond normal human capability. They didn't run. They flowed through corridors and up staircases with inhuman speed and coordination. Palace security systems that could stop armored vehicles failed to slow them down. Defensive barriers that had never been breached crumbled. Under attacks that restructured matter at the molecular level, the elite guard fell back level by level, fighting desperately to slow the human advance. These were warriors who had conquered. Dozens of species, soldiers trained from birth to show no fear. But they found themselves facing enemies who moved like liquid death and struck with weapons that unmade everything they touched. Captain Zerth commander of the elite guard, made his final stand at the throne room entrance. He had survived 100 battles and earned more decorations than any warrior in Empire history. Now he faced a single human soldier and knew with absolute certainty that he was about to die. "You're not supposed to exist," Zerth said as he raised his plasma rifle. "Humans died out centuries ago." Taeon's helmet retracted, revealing features that were unmistakably human, but somehow more than human. His eyes held depths that spoke of genetic modifications and technological enhancements that had elevated him beyond his species' original limitations. "We evolved," Taeon said simply, and then he moved. The battle lasted 3 seconds. Zerth's plasma rifle fired once before dissolving in his hands. His armor, designed to withstand direct hits from starship weapons, proved as fragile as paper against technology that operated outside conventional physics. He had time for one last thought before his enhanced nervous system shut down. These weren't the humans his empire remembered. These were something far more dangerous. Taeon stepped over the fallen captain and entered the throne room where Vorth waited with his final desperate gambit. The throne room was vast, its crystal walls rising toward a dome that showed the battle raging in orbit above. But Taeon's attention focused immediately on the cluster of figures huddled behind Vorth's golden throne, dozens of aliens from different HFYs. Species stood there with restraint collars around their necks, prisoners, taken from across the galaxy and kept as living trophies. Vorth stood behind them with a weapon pressed against the head of a young Kellyan female. His forearms trembled with rage and desperation as he faced the human who had destroyed his empire in a matter of hours. "I'll stay back!" Vorth shouted. "Come any closer and I'll execute them all. These are innocent civilians from every world." Claim to protect. Ion stopped walking and studied the scene with eyes that missed nothing. The hostages included children, elderly aliens, scholars and artists who had been captured simply because they represented the best of their species. Vorth had surrounded himself with everything he thought would make the humans hesitate. "Right," Taeon said quietly. "They are innocent." Taeon raised his hand, and his soldiers lowered their weapons without question. The throne room fell silent, except for the terrified breathing of the hostages and Vorth's desperate muttering. In the ancient Zephyrian dialect, above them, the crystal dome showed human ships maintaining their positions around the planet, patient as predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. "I know you're watching," Taeon said, but he wasn't speaking to Vorth. His voice carried clearly through the air, picked up by the hijacked communication systems that now broadcast from every corner of the Empire. "People of the galaxy, citizens of worlds both free and enslaved, this message reaches you across the stars. On thousands of planets, alien families gathered around viewing screens that had been dark for days. In hidden rebel camps, freedom fighters listened to voices they had thought were myths. In the deepest prison cells, political prisoners heard words that gave them hope for the first time in years. My name is General Taeyun of the Soul Defense Compact. Speak for humanity, a species you were told had vanished from existence. We never left. We simply learned to watch from the shadows, waiting for the moment when our intervention would serve justice rather than revenge." Vorth pressed his weapon harder against the young Kellyan's head, his yellow eyes wild with desperation. "Lies. Humanity is extinct. You're some kind of trick, some alien conspiracy." But Taeon continued speaking as if the tyrant hadn't said anything. "For 2 centuries, we observed as this empire grew in power and cruelty. We recorded every act of oppression, every world conquered, every species enslaved. We could have stopped it earlier, but early intervention would have made us conquerors rather than liberators." The hostages stared at him with expressions of wonder and disbelief. The elderly Nexari scholar, who had been captured for writing about Preempire history, whispered something to the others in his native tongue. Several of the younger prisoners began to weep, not from fear but from the overwhelming realization that rescue had finally come. The being behind those innocent people calls himself Supreme Chancellor, but he is nothing more than a tyrant who seized power through violence and fear. Today his reign ends, but not through human judgment alone. Taeon's soldiers moved with careful precision around the edges of the room, positioning themselves so that any action Vorth might take would be immediately countered. Their weapons remained lowered, but their enhanced reflexes meant they could respond faster than any conventional life form could react. Citizens of liberated worlds, Taeyon continued, humanity returns not as your rulers but as your partners, in rebuilding what tyranny destroyed. The Galactic Council that maintained peace for 3 centuries will be restored, with representatives from every free species working together to ensure that no single power can again threaten the liberty of others. Vorth's grip on his weapon began to shake as he realized that his hostages were no longer cowering behind him. The young Kellyan female had straightened her shoulders and was looking directly at Taeyon with trust in her large eyes. The Nexari scholar had stepped slightly forward, no longer trying to hide behind the others. Even the youngest prisoners seemed to sense that their nightmare was ending.
"Oh, Mimi, you cannot judge me."
Worth screamed, his voice breaking with hysteria. "I am the rightful ruler of this galaxy. These worlds belong to the Empire." "No," said a new voice from behind the hostages. Admiral Minho materialized in the throne room through the same dimensional folding technology that had brought Taeyon's forces to the planet. But he wasn't alone. With him came representatives from dozens of species, survivors of the Empire's oppression who had been secretly gathered from across the galaxy, the Altarian. Delegate's crystalline body glowed with soft light as she spoke. "Vorth of the Zephyrian Empire, you stand accused of crimes against the fundamental rights of sentient beings. You will be tried not by human law, but by the combined justice of every species you have wronged. The trial will be conducted according to the old council protocols," added the Kellan representative, his fur still bearing scars from Empire torture devices. "Every world will have a voice. Every species will be heard. This is not revenge. This is justice." Worth's weapon clattered to the floor as he realized that his empire had become his prison. The hostages walked away from him calmly, no longer afraid of a tyrant whose power had crumbled in a matter of hours. The young Kellyan female paused to bow respectfully to Taeyon before joining the other liberated prisoners. The trial of Supreme. Chancellor Vorth lasted 6 months and was broadcast to every corner of known space. Representatives from hundreds of worlds testified about the Empire's crimes. Evidence was presented in forms that no court had ever seen before. Quantum recordings that preserved not just events, but the emotions and thoughts of victims. The proceedings were conducted with meticulous care to ensure that justice was served according to the highest standards of galactic law. Vorth was found guilty on every charge and sentenced to life. Imprisonment on a world that had been set aside specifically for war criminals. He would live out his remaining years with others who had chosen tyranny over compassion, removed from civilized society but treated with the basic dignity he had denied to so many others. The rebuilt Galactic Council convened on a neutral world, its chambers filled with delegates who represented the free will of their people rather than the commands of an empire. Admiral Minho addressed the Assembly on humanity's final day as an active participant in galactic affairs. "We return now to our watch in the darkness," he said simply. "We will monitor and observe, ready to act if tyranny threatens freedom again. But we will not rule, and we will not conquer. The galaxy belongs to all its children equally. Human." Ships began disappearing from the skies above liberated worlds, fading back into the hidden dimensions where they had waited for so long. Some civilizations tried to track them, hoping to maintain contact with their mysterious rescuers. But humanity had learned the art of vanishing completely, leaving behind only the memory of justice served and balance restored in the years that followed. Children across the galaxy would hear stories about the humans who appeared when darkness seemed complete and hope had almost died. They came not as conquerors, but as guardians, assuring that no species would ever again face extinction or enslavement. While others watched in silence, the stars themselves seemed to whisper a truth that every sentient being came to understand. Humanity doesn't seek to rule the galaxy. They simply ensure that no one else does either.